What if Daenerys decided to remain in Essos in Game of Thrones? After Daenerys crushed the Masters' fleet at the Battle of Meereen and made them agree to her terms, Theon and Yara Greyjoy offered her their fleet in order to retake the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys thought long and hard about this. Finally, she had everything she could ever want. She had an army, she had her dragons, and now she had her fleet. The Seven Kingdoms were ripe for the taking, but there was something wrong. She thought about all the people that she had liberated. What would happen to them once she had left? She knew the Masters. She knew they had no intention of honouring this agreement. They would simply wait. Bide their time until she left, then they would strike and put everyone back in chains again. She would not, no, she could not let this happen. She would not let all those deaths be for nothing. She owed Westeros nothing. She had never even stepped foot in Westeros properly. Yes, the Iron Throne was hers by right, but why would she want such a throne? The people in the Seven Kingdoms were not her people. She did not know them, and they did not know her. But the people of Meereen and the Bay of Dragons, they were her people. So she decided to reject the Greyjoys' offer and remain in Essos. Her first port of call was to deal with the Masters of Yunkai and Astapor. Daario Naharis, his second sons, and a contingent of Dothraki were sent to Yunkai to deal with the Masters. The city fell quickly. Some of the Masters were exiled, others were put to the sword, but many still remained in the city. However, this time Daario was made High Magister of the city to rule over it in his queen's name. Next, Daenerys had Grey Worm and the Unsullied march on Astapor. Likewise, the city fell without much resistance. A member of the nobility and a former slave turned free man were made the magisters of the city to rule over it in the name of their queen, and a force of 2,000 Unsullied was left behind to garrison the city. The Bay of Dragons was now firmly under the control of Daenerys Stormborn, being ruled over from its capital of Meereen. But Daenerys was not done yet. She had not freed everyone. The brutal slave city of New Gis was her next target. Rallying her Dothraki, remaining Unsullied, and her fleet, she marched on the city. The Giscari sent their lockstep legions to meet them in the field, but just as their ancestors had discovered all those thousands of years ago, their legions were nothing to Dragonfire. Their armies and fleets were incinerated and their island blockaded. The city of New Gis held strong for a time, but was eventually taken by Grey Worm during a night attack. New Gis suffered a similar fate to its sister cities. Anyone who had practiced slavery was put to the sword and any slave was freed. And a nobleman from Meereen called Mairon, who had proven himself loyal to Daenerys, was made Magister of the city. But Daenerys was still not done, for she had sworn an oath to Missandei to help free her people from the yoke of the slavers. But there was a problem, for the Isle of Nath was protected by a disease called butterfly fever, which would kill any foreigner who stepped foot on the island. So Daenerys decided that if she could not protect Nath directly, she would root out the pirates in their hideouts in the Basilisk Isles. The campaign to take the Basilisk Isles was horrible. Many of her soldiers fell to pirate swords, many more fell to disease. But after nearly a year of horrific fighting, the last of the pirates were rooted out of their hideouts. Thousands of slaves were freed and the Basilisk Isles became known as the Dragon Isles. A permanent garrison was set up there and they began to rebuild the ancient city of Gorgossos, renaming it Daenerys. Many of the freed men of the Basilisk Isles remained within this city. The Isle of Nath remained independent yet under the protection of Daenerys, and Missandei was made ambassador to Nath. Daenerys' territory now stretched from Meereen in the north all the way to Sulfurios in the south. Her territory was vast and she ruled over millions. Now Daenerys was faced with a severe problem. She did not have enough Unsullied to garrison all of these cities and still be used as an army of liberation, and she had been forced to send most of her Dothraki north to deal with other Khalasars who had sworn eternal vengeance against Daenerys. These would have to be crushed before they had an opportunity to unite with Daenerys' other enemies. In short, Daenerys needed more soldiers, so she called a meeting of her Great Council, which was made up of her advisors, including her hand Tyrion Lannister, and representatives from all across her territories. She asked what she should do. Some suggested that she use her immense wealth to hire sellswords, but sellswords could be bought. One representative made the ugly suggestion of creating more Unsullied, which was naturally dismissed out of hand. Then another suggestion came. Why not just recruit from her cities? Thousands would be willing to fight and die for their queen. Daenerys fought on this for a while, but then agreed. However, both men and women should be allowed to join her army. So her people got to work, and all throughout her territory recruits lined up by the tens of thousands. Dario and Grey Worm trained up these new recruits, and in just over a year, House Targaryen had a new, mighty army, more than 30,000 strong. Not long after this, another bit of good news arrived. The last of the rebel Khalasars had been routed, and with that, all of the Dothraki Sea was now firmly under her control. And just in time too, for Daenerys had chosen her next conquest, the greatest slave city of all, Volantis. Her advisors begged her not to go through with this, as Volantis was a mighty city with powerful allies. But how could Daenerys claim to be breaker of chains if she in fact had not broken all the chains? So plans were made for the invasion of Volantis. But first she would have to deal with the cities of Mantares and Tolos, whose allegiances were not known. She sent envoys to Mantares in an attempt to persuade them to join her side. They sent back a box made of cedar with the heads of her envoys inside it. So Daenerys gathered her armies, her fleets and her dragons and made their way to Mantares and Tolos. The first battle was a naval battle fought just off the coast of the Isle of Cedars between the Targaryen fleet and the fleet of Tolos. The fleet of Tolos was defeated and the Targaryen fleet began to lay siege to the city. Likewise, Daenerys' forces had successfully defeated the Mantares army on the Demon Road. Things were looking good for Daenerys, that is until Volantis decided to join the fun. The Volantene fleet snuck around and attacked the Targaryen fleet from behind, decimating the fleet. Daenerys responded quickly, using her dragons to hunt down the Volantene fleet. But this is exactly what they wanted. The Volantene unleashed a barrage of anti-dragon weaponry, which caught Daenerys unprepared and killed Rhaegal. Daenerys was absolutely devastated by what she had seen and was utterly inconsolable. Utterly enraged and not thinking straight, she took Drogon and Viserion over the city of Tolos and burnt it to the ground. Her advisors could only watch on in horror as to what she was doing. Likewise, the city of Mantares witnessed what had happened to Tolos with great horror. They soon realised that this fate would also befall them, and the Volantene army with their promised anti-dragon weapons were nowhere to be seen. It soon became painfully clear that Volantis had only joined the war to see if they could in fact kill a dragon, and in reality had no interest in helping Mantares. Realising this, the city was forced to ask for terms. The terms were simple. Slavery was to be outlawed at once and any slave was to be set free. Mantares would also join Daenerys' new kingdom. They would follow her laws, pay her tribute, send their sons and daughters to fight in her armies, and in exchange they would live in peace and be allowed to govern themselves. At the end of the Second Slaver War, as it would be known in time, House Targaryen ruled over a mighty realm. With the city of Mantares joining her, she now stretched ever further westwards. Not long after the war, the landmen of Lazar, seeing this growing power, pledged their allegiance to Queen Daenerys, Stormborn, and became part of her new empire. Daenerys then ordered that every city, every town, every village within her vast empire send their young men and women to join her army. She planned on creating the largest army that Essos had ever seen and use it to finally crush Volantis. Daenerys was adamant that she would build the greatest army Essos had ever seen and use it to crush Volantis. But there were problems. Her empire was vast and had grown vast in a relatively short period of time. There was a great deal of internal strife within her empire. The landmen of Lazar and the Dothraki hated each other. The city of New Gis was in open revolt. The Sons of the Harpy had made a comeback in Astapor and Yunkai, and the loyalty of Mantares was questionable at best. Daenerys would have to deal with these issues before she could even think about marching on Volantis. First, she would deal with New Gis, brutally and efficiently crushing the uprising there, putting all the masters to the sword and installing a larger garrison to watch over the city. She then held a meeting between the Dothraki and the landmen. It was a tense meeting to say the least, but after several hours of incredibly aggressive negotiations, they finally came to an agreement. The creation of an internal border between the Dothraki Sea and Lazar, which the Dothraki agreed never to cross without permission. Then it was the turn of the Sons of the Harpy. Now these were a bit more difficult difficult to destroy. At first she attempted sheer brute force, but the Sons of the Harpy could simply melt back into the population, which made this difficult. A new campaign was launched to turn the people against the Sons of the Harpy. It was very difficult and took more than a year to properly implement, but eventually the people turned against the Sons. But Daenerys was not done. She continued to look inward, determined to stabilize her empire before she marched on Volantis. She would spend the next 3 years stabilizing her empire. During these 3 years, the last of the rebel Dothraki were finally defeated, and all of the Dothraki Sea was brought under the control of House Targaryen. The city of Karth was also brought into the empire, but through peaceful means. Also during this time, Daenerys and her advisors restructured how the empire worked. A new merchant class was created, the so-called New Gold class. This class was primarily made up of former slaves and peasants who had been granted large loans from the crown. They used these loans to start up their own businesses and trade networks. Many became extremely wealthy because of this, even more wealthy than many of the old aristocratic families. And the best part about this was, because this was a loan, they would have to pay it back, which meant they would always be in Daenerys' pocket. Daenerys even found allies during this time, mainly some of the princes of the Summer Isles who absolutely hated Volantis. These princes agreed to fight alongside her when the time came, and now that time had come. Her empire was stable, her treasury was overflowing, now was the time to strike. Daenerys raised a mighty host of more than 200,000. Although not the largest army Essos had ever seen, it was certainly the largest in living memory. But during these 3 years, Volantis had also been busy hiring sellswords and bolstering its own defences, and when war came, it was more bloody than anyone could have imagined. At first, things seemed to go well, with House Targaryen winning a string of victories on both sea and land. They were even able to capture some cities loyal to Volantis, but what Daenerys thought would be a quick victory turned into 10 years of hell. Her forces would take territory only to lose it hours later to the Volantene. She had to use her dragons sparingly, for Volantis had already brought one of them down. The war was a hard slog, but slowly yet surely, House Targaryen's forces made progress. Daario Naharis was even able to convince some of the sellsword companies to switch sides. Daenerys' allies from the Summer Isles proved invaluable as well, smashing the Volantene fleet in a series of naval battles, before joining House Targaryen's fleet in blockading Volantis from the ocean. After several years of hard fighting, the forces of House Targaryen were finally within reach of Volantis itself. Another 4 months of fighting saw the last Volantene ally city fall. A month later, Volantis was completely encircled. But this was not the end, for the walls of Volantis were massive. It took more than a year just to breach the outer walls on the western part of the city, but after a tremendous battle which lasted for many days, the western portion of the city was captured. But this was done at an immense cost, mainly the sacrifice of Grey Worm, who almost single-handedly held the gatehouse open long enough for the Targaryen army to charge through. If it wasn't for him, the west would never have been taken. Another week of intense house-to-house fighting saw the Great Bridge of Volantis captured. A beachhead was finally established to the eastern part of the city. Hordes of Dothraki screamers came pouring across the bridge, cutting down anyone in their path. While this was happening, the slaves of Volantis launched an uprising against their masters. After a day of heavy fighting, only 2 points remained that were under the control of Volantis. Daenerys offered the Volantene masters one chance to surrender, or they would all burn. Seeing that there was no alternative, the masters agreed and opened the gates, only to be slaughtered by more Dothraki screamers. Daenerys could not allow such men to live. Finally, after years of horror, the 3-headed dragon banner of House Targaryen flew over the city of Volantis, and the empire of Queen Daenerys Stormborn stretched from the Bone Mountains in the east to the Orange Coast in the west. But the cost for such a victory was immeasurable. She had lost a third of her army. Likewise, the Unsullied had been whittled down to less than 2,000 strong. The mournful cries of grieving relatives could be heard all throughout her empire. These cries would keep Daenerys up during the nights. Although there were more chains that needed to be broken, Daenerys had lost all taste for conquest. She would have to find other ways to liberate people. She would devote the rest of her life to ensuring that her empire remained strong and her people remained safe and prosperous. She had no interest in the Iron Throne, for she had created her new Valyria, and she would not let it fall. Daenerys also married a prince from the Summer Isles generals called Xandus in order to cement their alliance, although it was made clear this marriage would not bear children. Although the two certainly got along, maybe even grew to love each other, however the question of succession was eventually brought up, as if she died without an heir, her empire would certainly crumble. Although Daenerys could not have children because of a curse placed upon her, there were other ways to create heirs. Throughout her travels, Daenerys had adopted many children, taking them into her household and placing them under her protection. And if bastards could be naturalized by royal decree, then surely so could these children. After all, they were practically her children anyway. So she officially naturalized 6 of these children into House Targaryen and would send them away to govern different parts of her empire. A Dothraki named Erika, whose parents had been wiped out by a rival Khalasar, was named Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea and sent to govern Vaes Dothrak. Then there was Aerion, a son of the member of the nobility of Mantares, who had been sent to Daenerys as a baby to be a hostage, but who had grown to love her as a mother. He was also naturalized and made High Magister of Karth. The beautiful princess Keisha Quo, whose parents had died fighting alongside Daenerys during the Volantene Wars, was made Queen of the Dragon Isles and Protector of the Summer Sea. Perhaps as a final insult to the masters of Volantis, the son of former Volantene slaves named Jaron was made High Lord of Volantis. The daughter of a Volantene noble who had been executed for supporting Daenerys, who was of the blood of old Valyria named Sarah, was made Great Shepherdess of Lazar. And finally, Culla, who was the daughter of a great family from Meereen who idolized Daenerys, was made Queen of the Bay of Dragons and heir to the imperial throne. Daenerys would rule over the great Targaryen Empire for another 30 years. These were largely peaceful and prosperous years. There were minor wars and rebellions, yes, but nothing too major. The greater Targaryen Empire, as it was known, was the superpower of Essos. Its only real rival was the Golden Empire of Yi Ti. But even dragons must die eventually, and at the age of 68, Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen passed away peacefully in her sleep. All throughout her empire, her people mourned the loss of their queen, their Khaleesi, their Misa. She was succeeded by her daughter, Calla, who became Culla, first of her name, Queen of the Bear Dragons and Dragon Isles, Khaleesi of the Great Grass Sea, Great Shepherdess of Lazar, Queen of Karth, Magistrix of Volantis, Empress of the Greater Targaryen Empire. For the next 400 years, the Greater Targaryen Empire would rule as the superpower of Western Essos, but it would never be as peaceful or as prosperous as it was under Queen Daenerys. The 6 naturalized children would go on to form their own branches of House Targaryen, each one constantly vying for power. Civil wars were common, with the phrase, whenever a Targaryen emperor dies, 10 more rise up to take their place, becoming common. But what does the rest of the world look like? Well, that is a story for another day.